Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeff Malinoff. We got some good things to talk about in the world of football today. We got some more information on the Robert Kraft and his prostitution charges, or that sounds like he did prostitution. His association with the prostitution charges that happened, and he could be facing some jail time. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Colin Kaepernick in the news again, and him talking not with the AAF, but the other league that's happening next year. We'll talk about that as well. Oakland has a new home, or well, not a new home, but a home nonetheless for the 2019 season. We'll also get into discussion about that. And anything else that needs to be talked about, we will talk about. But first things first, because the title of this show is Oakland and where they will play, the Raiders. They are going to play in Oakland. They're going to play in the Coliseum. They're they're finalizing the deal with the Coliseum and making sure that the 2019 season is in Oakland to finish up before they go to Las Vegas in the year 2020. So that's next year. So with that, the question is based off of how are the fans going to react to this? I think that is an important question. Maybe not an important question, but a question to me that should be asked about because of the fact this will be the last time we see them play in Oakland. So what does this mean for the fan base? Are they still going to remain loyal to the Raiders? Like some obviously will. But will they receive some hostile reactions when they play at home games? Like, I'm not going to say they definitely will or definitely won't, but I think that's definitely a possibility when you think about it because of the fact that they're leaving their team, they're leaving their city, that they've been there for decades now. And they're not just leaving there, like they're also leaving the state, and that's never happened before either. They usually move to Oakland. It's usually just Oakland or it's LA, so now going to Vegas is a whole nother story. And getting the ability to be in a multi-billion-dollar stadium in Vegas seems to be a good fit in theory, but you also have to look at the fact that this city in general does not really have familiarity with a franchise, a professional franchise. And when you look at a professional franchise there's only one, and that's the Vegas Golden Knights, and they've only been there for about a year. Granted, they went to the Stanley Cup final, but again, only a year. So thinking about that is, you're going to a brand new city that's never had a professional football team before. So you're looking into a whole new – they are going to be completely different from how other cities that have had teams would react. It's not like going to L.A. where they've had a football team before. You know you can make a market out of it. You're going to a whole new area. This is a whole new – what's the word I'm looking for? A whole new venture point. This is a whole new – area. Like they're not used to this kind of thing. So definitely a scenario where this could go very bad for them. I'm not gonna take that out of the equation, mainly because it's the Raiders. I mean, they kind of went already unlucky this year. I mean, look at John Gruden trading two key players on the Raiders that people were like, you should build a team around that, not get rid of them. But you got first-round picks out of it, so it was one of those where it was like, oh, you got what you wanted. You got multiple first-round picks for Khalil Mack, and you got a first-round pick for Amari Cooper, which people thought they wouldn't be able to get a first-round pick for Amari Cooper, so that was unusual. But they were thinking, since they traded with the Bears and they traded with the Cowboys, it was one of those factors in where, they're going to get a pick in the top 15 because they probably won't be going to the playoffs. And boy, were we wrong, because I was wrong, at least. I didn't think they would make the playoffs. I thought the Bears with Mitchell Trubisky had a long ways to go. I didn't think that by the time the trade deadline happened and the Murray Cooper trade went down, I didn't expect the Cowboys to really make it to the playoffs. I thought it would be going to someone else in that division. But we were wrong, and honestly, the biggest egg on his face is John Gruden, because not only does he not get these high draft picks for these top players, it's not high draft picks in the slightest. It's the number 24 and number 27 pick, respectively. So they have the number 4 pick, the number 24th pick, and the number 27th pick. 4th pick, of course, is great. That's great. But that was their own pick. So getting 2 extra first-round draft picks is good, but when they're number 24, number 27, it's not like you are going to get the biggest, most famous names in the draft. It's one of those things you look at, and it's honestly pretty disappointing that they got those low of draft picks. And now you got to look at the facts that maybe trading away Khalil Mack and trading away Amari Cooper were not the best ideas. Of course, everyone's saying that now, but at the time, it's like, they got first-round picks, they'll be fine. But what can they really get? I mean, it's still a first-round pick. I'm not taking that away from them. But with the cost of giving up those players, the best players in the on their team, and Khalil Mack was the best player on their team, so I'll say that the first time. Getting only a 24th pick for Khalil Mack and getting a 27th pick for Amari Cooper is not worth the trade, in my opinion. So it's very disappointing to see overall the facts that they just can't get it done. They can try to do their best to make this work, but I don't think they're going to get they're not going to get their big picks they were looking for in exchange for those 2 key players. So they're kind of in trouble overall, but they really need to nail these number 24 and number 27 pick to make sure that they get basically a fair exchange in the trade for Cooper and Mack. So my guess, this is just my guess, to make this trade look good for the Raiders, they need to draft the 2 guys with the 2 first-round draft picks from the Bears and the Cowboys. The Raiders need to draft at least one of them to be a Pro Bowler or on the or possibly in the assumption of Rookie of the Year. Someone successful their rookie year. They need a good. I am one of the main guys that will say you are not going to the draft to win now. That's not where you're going to. That's not why you're going. That's not who you're picking. You're picking for your future. You're picking for the next year or so, next couple of years. You got to have these guys develop. You got to have them marinate in the NFL. Mainly, like the quarterback position is the main one with that, but it's also just in general. You just got to give these guys time, and giving them not enough time is just too much pressure in general. So you can't do that. But I'm going to make an exception to the rule with John Gruden, because if he wants to make an impact going into Vegas, he needs to nail on these picks for sure. And just John Gruden's in a very tough space. He's only going to his second year in his second tenure with the Raiders. So a lot is riding on this second year, to be honest with you, going into Vegas. But honestly, he's going to Vegas to sell tickets. That's basically what he's meant to do. He's a selling point for the Vegas fans because he has a history of success, won Super Bowl, his first year with Tampa Bay, of course, being traded by the Raiders, ironically, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for, I believe it was a first-round draft pick for a coach, which is unheard of nowadays. But, going into that season, guess who the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat in the Super Bowl? Yeah, that was the Oakland Raiders. So it's very ironic how things just work out for him, in general. But when you're thinking about it, if Vegas wants to sell tickets, they need to keep John Gruden, obviously, but I think when it comes down to it, John Gruden may not be the best option. And I mean, in general. Of all the coaches available, you picked a guy that was gone from the league for about a decade, not coaching at least, and now he's basically running everything. So I think there's a lot riding on the success of John Gruden, not for the Raiders organization as well, not just for Gruden himself. So I don't know. I just think maybe, just maybe, they made a huge mistake. I mean, it's hard to say if it was a mistake or not right now because he's only been one season, but for his moves so far, they have not been the best moves at all. So that's all I got to say about that. But, I mean, it's all based off assumption, and we'll see. It's only been a year, like I said. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he'll turn it around, and maybe he'll even win a Super Bowl, But I'm not obviously going to say yes or no. So we are going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll be talking about Robert Kraft and his certain situation with the law. We'll be right back right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Just talked about the Raiders and knowing they're going to be still in Oakland for the 2019 season, and what does this mean for the rest of the fan base and such. But moving on, we got to talk about Robert Kraft still. And with Robert Kraft, obviously you know by now about the prostitution sting he was involved with and kind of the trouble he's facing. But it might be more serious than many think because, it might lead to more jail time. Some people thought it wouldn't lead to jail time, but this is a very big possibility that it might lead to jail time. So here's the information that I know from at least, this is from TMZ Sports and such, other links. The Palm Beach County State Attorney, Dave Ehrenberg, I could be wrong on that, said Kraft faces 1 year in prison if convicted on the first-degree misdemeanor charge of soliciting another to commit prostitution. So what I'm getting by that is it's either he was going to use them to prostitute other people, like he was using it as his own prostitution for himself or for maybe others. That's kind of what it sounds like. Maybe that's just for the general purpose of it. Or just the fact that he just bought a prostitute. Which shouldn't just say soliciting a prostitute, not soliciting another to commit prostitution? Because it sounds like he's paying someone to be a prostitute for somebody else, doesn't it? That's just how I take it. But of course, it's probably due to the fact that he was the one that she was going to commit prostitution with. That's basically what I got from that information. And with that, like 1 year in prison, that's not gonna really look good right after his 6th Super Bowl win, after like buying the team and such. And this is just a bad look for the team in general, not just for Kraft, but for the Patriots. I mean, they already have a bad rap as of right now because of the facts that they have the Spygate, they have the Flakegate, they have the Aaron Hernandez issues in the past. They just never have had a good running when it comes down to controversies, if you will. So with that, I want to add that if he does face up to 1 year in prison, I don't know what the NFL will do in response to that. Because because the NFL has already claimed they will not get involved or not interfere in any way, shape, or form with the investigation of Robert Kraft. So they're leaving him out high to dry, or they're just not going to make sure the police make the right type of investigation, not leaving any controversy to it. So with that also being said, if he does face 1 year in prison, if he does get jail time, which is unlikely, but it's still a possibility, I will definitely have to say that he might lose. I don't want to say he will just straight up lose ownership, because I'm not entirely positive he would, based off just jail time, because it's still a serious offense. It's a 1 year in jail too, so it's not like it's not like a small prison time. It's a whole year. So with that, I have to, what's this mean for the future of the ownership of the New England Patriots? I'm not sure if this puts to effect as what this would cause for concern. It's just an interesting thing to look at, because there's plenty of what if scenarios here of what would happen. Does he get a jail time? If he even doesn't, if he is convicted or whatever, if it's not jail time, it's 100 hours of community service and being enrolled or required here, better to be, and also required to attend a prostitution and human trafficking awareness course. And I'm not sure. I get what that. I get what they're trying to do is just make them learn more about prostitution and why it's bad. First of all, you should already know that, but regardless, I think it's one of those things in where it's just more of a just saying bad. Just, you did a bad thing. This is why it was bad. But in reality, I think it's hopefully going to help if he does get into that class. Maybe it is best case scenario that he does get the 100 hours of community service and the course about prostitution and what was it? Solicit? What was the actual? I gotta go back and read what the name was. It was prostitution and human trafficking. So with all of this going down and all of this, those huge thing happened and a bunch of names got leaked and he was one of them. This everything. Is this what he's like? Is he going to be remembered mainly by this, or is he going to be remembered by his Super Bowl success, his team's Super Bowl success? Because this definitely puts a damper on his legacy. Absolutely. It has to, right? Because it's such a big deal. It's a huge deal. And with all of that being said, I don't really know where you come back. I don't know how you come back from this in theory. And when I mean come back from this, I mean like to be looked at like as a Hall of Famer, if you will, in the Pro Football Hall of Fame due to his success as an owner. But I think with this whole trafficking issue, sex trafficking and the prostitution and all that stuff, I think this definitely hurts. I think this definitely hurts his career. And does he come back from this? I do not know. Does he sell the team out of embarrassment? I mean, we've seen stuff like that happen before. But I don't know. This is just a touchy subject. We don't know all the information. The court, apparently the trial is going to happen in April. So there is time to really see how this is all going to go down at the end of the day. But again, this is a huge concern regardless for the Patriots organization. But just because it's the Patriots and they've done this kind of thing, well, not done this thing kind of thing before, but have come back from deficits in the past, I guess you can say, they will probably win another Super Bowl. Just despite everything that's happened, they'll still overcome everything, because that's usually what they've been doing the last couple of years. Especially Rob Parker, who's saying, Peyton Manning, excuse me, Tom Brady's too old this, Tom Brady's too old that, and he's going to never go back to a Super Bowl, and that was when he turned 35. And look, fast forward 6 years, and he's been in 3 straight. So obviously Rob Parker's dead wrong about Tom Brady and so on and so forth. But I don't know if this would be a concern for anyone trying to join them in the offseason. I'm assuming not, but it's just probably it's just bad timing just right after the Super Bowl win, because the Patriots are the talk of the town. Second team ever to win 6 Super Bowls behind before them was the Pittsburgh Steelers after their win in Super Bowl 43. So the question remains, is this season going to be remembered for the Patriots winning the 6th Super Bowl and arguably the worst Super Bowl ever? Or is it going to be remembered for the prostitution ring? It's an interesting thing to think about, because we really don't know. When we look at this 3 or 4 years from now, we'll see how everything transpires. But regardless, it's a big question. The question needs to be answered. So that's my take on it, at least for the Patriots. But honestly, looking into there's actually something, another thing about the Patriots. I saw on Instagram that Josh Gordon put on his Instagram bio that he was a Super Bowl 53 champion. And people were kind of having a field day with that, because it's like he left because he relapsed, unfortunately. And so the question is, does he deserve to be considered a champion? He was on their team for an X amount of time, and he didn't do very much due to his relapse, and he didn't play in the playoffs at all. So the question is, does he deserve to be called a champion? He's got to get a ring, I think, regardless, due to the fact he was on the roster at the time they won the Super Bowl. So I think he's getting a ring regardless. But does that mean he deserves one going into this next season? Does he deserve to get a ring? Does he deserve to go to the ring presentation, and so on and so forth? Because it's still a touchy subject, because of the fact, like he said, he relapsed. He kind of has an addiction, and it's hard to say what's going where. So I don't know. I just thought that'd be an interesting take to think about, because of the facts that he wasn't really part of the team when they needed a Super Bowl run, when they needed him to go to help win the Super Bowl, So regardless, that's how that's all going to go. That's how all that is going down to me. But we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about other things that happened in the NFL, including a cut by a team that signed, including a player cut by the Baltimore Ravens, and what future lies for him. We'll be right on that when we return.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Just finished talking about the whole Robert Kraft incident. Now we're moving on to the Baltimore Ravens because Michael Crabtree, who they signed just this one season ago, has been cut. And this begs the question, is he considered a bust? I mean, he's been playing for 3 teams now in his career. Got drafted in 2009 by the 49ers with, I believe it was the 10th overall pick, maybe the 9th, somewhere around there. And he's really only had a couple, let's look at his stats throughout his career. So in his career, he's never had over 100 receptions in one season. He's had 2 seasons with 1,000 yards or more receiving yards, and he's had no season with 10 touchdowns or more. The most he's ever gotten was 9, and that was 2 seasons, one with the Raiders and one with the 49ers. So the question is that a bust? His total career is 141 games with 633 receptions for 7,477 yards. That's an 11.8 average. 53 yards per game. And 54 total touchdowns. The last year, he only had 3 touchdowns on 607 yards on 54 receptions. That's kind of average. I think average is being also generous in that standpoint. So honestly, looking at those stats and looking, he just got cut, I truly believe he's a bust. And it's unfortunate to see a player that came off of college with all that hype after the big Texas Tech play to beat Texas in that big, huge rivalry game that really cemented his career, honestly. So with that and not having one 100-yard season or anything of that nature and only 2 1,000-yard seasons, yeah, you can consider him a bust. I think definitely you can consider him a bust. It's disappointing for sure, but I think you can definitely consider him a bust. But maybe it's a little late to even talk about busts. But for Michael Crabtree, since he was drafted in 2009, but, he was always supposed to make this big jump, you know what I mean, to a big-time receiver. And his best time was, roughly with Colin Kaepernick's reign of terror when he was bringing the Niners to the Super Bowl. So it's been a very interesting situation for Michael Crabtree, but it's very disappointing to find out about the cut after just one season, and I think he might be done. I don't know who else picks him up, but I think he's on the back end of his career now. I mean, he's 10 years in the league. What who's going to pay him the money to be the number one wide receiver? There's nobody. In other news in the world of football, the XFL have a couple new head coaches and GMs out of the same person. So, for the XFL team that's going to be taking place in Seattle, their head coach and general manager is Jim Zorn. And for those in Seattle, you know exactly who Jim Zorn is. He was your quarterback in the 80s, late 70s, early to the 80s. He was basically your Russell Wilson before Russell Wilson was Russell Wilson. That sounds accurate. And looking into his coaching career, however, that is a whole different story. He had a pretty good career overall, all things considered, as a quarterback. But as a head coach, well, I guess had a coach in general, it's a little bit different. I'll start with this. As his coaching career began, he was not a head coach. He started in 1988 as a coach when he retired in 1987 from football. He played for the Seahawks, like I said, as the quarterback from 1976 to 1984. So he was kind of the face of the franchise for their beginning times. And I'm not sure if that was their inaugural season, but it was one of their first seasons, definitely. No, actually, he was their very first quarterback. The Seahawks in 1976, he was their very first starting quarterback. So he's legendary in Seattle. He's kind of a running back. He was kind of running, too. He had 17 rushing touchdowns in his career. So he had a pretty good, he kind of had a Russell Wilson kind of esque career. But moving on into his coaching career, as soon as he retired in 1987, he was the offense assistant / quarterbacks coach for Boise State. Then became the offensive coordinator at Utah State. Already a good start. Then he became the quarterbacks coach for Minnesota. And then was actually the offensive assistant for the Seattle Seahawks in 1997. And how did the Seattle Seahawks do in 1997? Well, I'll gladly tell you, because they did mediocre at best, because they went a pedestrian 8-8 that year. And as for as an offensive assistant, they had a couple of Pro Bowlers. Ironically, their quarterback was Warren. Well, maybe not ironically, but their quarterback was Warren Moon, who started around the same time as Jim Zorn did. Jim Zorn started in 1976, but from 1978 to 1983, before he went to the Houston Oilers, Warren Moon was in the CFL with the Edmonton Eskimos. And he was actually one of the most successful in the history of the CFL because 1978, 1979, 1980, 81, and 82, so 5 years in a row, he won their championship game. He won their Grey Cup, which is their Super Bowl, which is incredible to think about. So that's just domination in his Canadian football career. But he did have a pretty good NFL career, was where he went into the Hall of Fame and all that. But regardless, the Seahawks, that year went 8-8 when he was their offensive assistant. Then he goes to Detroit Lions as their quarterbacks coach. And who was their quarterback in that time? They went 5-11. Their quarterback was Scott Mitchell. For those who don't remember who Scott Mitchell is, it's probably a good thing. Because he was a backup for Miami for a period of time and kind of went back. Then after his stint with Miami, he went into the NFL Europe League where they had an American team in there called the Orlando Thunder. Then he went to Detroit for a pretty hefty contract, actually, if I remember correctly. He got a pretty sweet deal out of it, and I believe it was $11 million total. I could be, maybe it was $11 million a year, something like that. I'm not gonna completely guess on what it was, but I remember there's something roughly around $1 million Oh, geez. I didn't realize this. In 2014, Scott Mitchell, who was the quarterback, he was 6'5". Oh, he was 6'6", actually. 249. So he was a pretty built dude. He was a pretty big guy, but not like overweight or anything. Well, in 2014, he reached 366 pounds. And he was on The Biggest Loser. Ouch. That maybe we didn't need to know, but that's kind of sad. That is really sad. I didn't know he gained so much weight. But I hope for the best for him. But going back to Jim Zorn and his career, after that he goes back to the Seahawks as their quarterbacks coach. So he's been a quarterback coach for multiple teams basically. And from 2001 when he first started, their first season when he was there, they went 9-7. They were in the AFC at the time, not the NFC, before they moved to the NFC. I'm not sure why exactly, but that's what happened. He was actually their quarterback coach for 6 years. And then Washington Redskins came calling, and he gets his first head coaching gig for the Washington Redskins in 2008. And you're probably wondering how he did in that first tenure as a head coach in the NFL. I will gladly tell you, mediocre. Last place in the NFC East, 8-8 for the Washington Redskins. As for the next season, he coached what would be his final coaching season. And you probably know where this is going. He was last in the division again, this time 4-12. So his career, his 2 seasons as a head coach were 8-8 and 4-12. So nothing spectacular there. Then he was just quarterbacks coach for Baltimore and Kansas City until 2012. Now he's not only the head coach of the XFL team in Seattle that is not yet to be named, but he's also the general manager. So from what I've gathered from these information about the XFL, the player, the coach, and the GM are been the same person for the last couple of teams. Last time I checked, for the Washington D.C. team, Pep Hamilton, I believe the offensive coordinator for the Michigan Wolverines with Jim Harbaugh at the time. He was assistant head coach and passing games coordinator. That's what he was. That was his official title. Now he is the head coach and general manager of the XFL team in Washington. And I believe there's one more coach that has been announced. I could be completely wrong on this. I mean, that might have been the first one, actually. But, again, so the main two are Pep Hamilton and Jim Zorn. So that is definitely something to think about when you're looking at the quality that you're going to get for the XFL. I'm still going to give it the benefit of the doubt. I feel like there's still opportunities for the XFL to succeed, and I hope for the best for them. I really do. But we are going to take another short break. When we get back, we'll finish up the day with some more talk about more football. We'll be right back right after this.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, finishing up the day here. Well, the AAF has been around for 3 weeks now? roughly. Something like that. And they're already getting sued. They already have a lawsuit filed against them. So that's, if I did my math right, let's look at my watch here. That is the quickest time I've ever seen a football league get sued. Or, I guess maybe the NFL got sued 3 weeks into their existence, but who knows? But that's just absurd. It's been 3 weeks. So this man sues the AAF for he alleged that he came up with the league and says co-founder wanted the XFL name, which I'm a little confused what that really means. Here, I'll read more into it. So according to Michael Rothstein, Robert Venich, who is the CFO of Treble Music, filed a suit Friday in L.A. Superior Court, alleging he came up with the idea of the league. He alleged the AAF co-founder Charlie Ebersol had a handshake agreement with him that was violated. As a result, he is seeking 50% ownership in the league, financial damages, and public acknowledgement of his co-founding role. In his lawsuit also states Ebersol attempted but failed to garner licensing from the WWE and NBC that would have allowed the league to use the XFL name. That makes sense why that was up there. So I guess what the AAF was trying to do was become the XFL and make it a developmental league and buy the name off of the WWE and Vince McMahon. And I guess they were in the middle of already making their own. They're making the revamp of the XFL themselves, so they wouldn't go for it. So I guess that makes sense in the long run, but the question is, do you believe this? Do you believe this man actually the CFO of this of Treble Music came up with was also one of the main guys who came up with the idea of the AAF, and he had a quote handshake agreement? But I think the main thing is what he wants in return is, I'm not sure how much financial damages is, but 50% ownership of the league in the league might be a big glass of water to order, if you know what I mean. But I don't know what the limit to the financial damages are. I'm not sure what that money would ensue or how much it would be worth-wise. But also, the idea of him saying a public acknowledgement of his co-founding role is like one of those kids in your assignment, like your project, saying, I came up with this. I did it. Me. Like, and you're like, okay, you did it. You helped. But I want you to tell everybody. It's one of those things where it's kind of petty, honestly, from hearing about this. And I could be maybe overacting this, but I just see this more along lines of just, I think someone's overreacting to this, maybe, or maybe not overreacting, but just being a little jealous. Maybe saying I came up with this. It just sounds like when it's a handshake agreement, though, it sounds more along lines of he thought maybe this wasn't going to be as big or as successful, possibly, or he just saw like I'll get some compensation for the idea, but he didn't get the title of co-founder, maybe that he wanted, or he wanted some recognition, and he didn't get it, so he was like, okay, I'm just going to sue you. So maybe that's a little over the top. I'm not sure. Maybe that's overreacting. We obviously don't know all the details. But regardless, I think it's one of those factors in where you're going to look at it as just a guy asking for recognition. I'm not sure if there's more to it. There's probably plenty more to it, but we don't know. This is just recently a lawsuit filed, so we really don't know what's really going to go down. So I'm not entirely sure what's going to come up of this. And what I mean by that is what the outcome will be. Will he get 50% ownership? Will he get this quote-unquote financial damages and the public acknowledgement that this was half of his idea? Because that sounds more along the lines of just like it just sounds like someone upset they didn't get much credit in a school project or something like that, like someone that's just bitter or jealous or something of that nature. But I'm not entirely sure. I can't really pinpoint it out. There obviously are a lot of unanswered questions, but these will all be answered in due time, I believe. Maybe this will just be settled out of court, which it probably will be. But that is the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me today on football. Tune us in on Thursday where we'll have more football news and such. But as always, I'm Jeff Malinoff, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.